Isaac Whitlow's hands froze mid-swing as he watched his neighbor stack another bale of straw against her barn wall. November wind tore across the Kansas prairie, and Marta Kovrick, barely 6 months a widow, was building what looked like kindling around her only shelter. He'd seen desperation before, but this was madness. The straw wouldn't protect anything. It would feed the first spark that caught. He dropped his axe and started walking, boots crushing frozen grass. Someone had to stop her before she burned everything to the ground. If you're watching from a place where winters test your will to survive, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story of survival and unexpected wisdom reaches across the world. Isaac reached Marta's property line and stopped. The wind hit harder here, unbroken by trees or hills. Just open prairie and that barn, half wrapped in golden straw that fluttered like it wanted to fly away. "Marta!" She didn't turn, just kept working, her thin frame bent against a bale that probably weighed half what she did. "Marta Kovrick, you need to stop this right now." This time she straightened. Her face was raw from cold, her hands wrapped in cloth that used to be her husband's shirt. "Isaac Whitlow, come to tell me how to run my place again?" "Come to keep you from burning it down." She pushed the bale tight against the wall. "That's so." "That's straw, Marta. You know what straw does in winter? It catches fire. One spark from your stovepipe and everything you got left goes up." "And if it doesn't catch fire?" Isaac stepped closer. "Then it does nothing. Absolutely nothing. You're wasting time and material on something that won't keep out the cold, won't keep your animals warm, won't do a damn thing except make you look foolish." Marta wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. "Foolish? That's what you think?" "That's what I know. I've survived 23 winters on this prairie, Marta. Your husband, God rest him, he survived 15. Neither of us ever wrapped a barn in straw because it's the worst possible—" "My husband's dead, Isaac." The words hit like stones. Isaac's mouth closed. "He's dead," Marta said again, quieter. "And I'm not. And this barn, and these animals, and this land, they're all I got left. So if you're just here to tell me I'm wrong, you can go." "I'm here because I've seen what happens when people try desperate things in desperate times. It ends bad, Marta. Every time." She bent down, grabbed another bale. "Then I guess you'll have a good story to tell come spring." Isaac watched her struggle with the weight. His instinct said to help. His pride said to leave. He did neither, just stood there like a fence post while she wrestled the straw into place. "You're really doing this?" "I really am." "Even though it's foolish?" "Even though you think it is." She looked at him directly. "You ever consider you might be wrong about something, Isaac? Just once in 23 winters?" He wanted to argue, wanted to list every reason she was making a mistake. Instead, he turned and walked back to his own property, her question following him like smoke. That night, the temperature dropped. Isaac woke to his barn door rattling so hard he thought it would tear off the hinges. He dressed in the dark, pulling on every layer he owned, and made his way outside. The cold hit like a fist. His breath crystallized instantly. The stars were sharp as broken glass. His barn door had ice on the inside. He stood there, lantern in hand, watching frost creep across the wood in patterns that looked like frost ferns. The animals shifted nervously. His horse, Maggie, had ice forming on her muzzle. This wasn't normal cold. This was the kind that killed. He checked the firewood. Half the pile was frozen so solid it wouldn't burn right. Too much moisture locked in ice. The stove would struggle. The animals would suffer. Across the field, a single light burned in Marta's window. Isaac told himself not to look, told himself to focus on his own problems. But his eyes kept drifting to that light, and to the dark shape of her barn with its ridiculous straw coat. Morning came brutal and white. The sun rose but gave no warmth. Isaac's firewood situation got worse. 3 logs cracked when he tried to split them, the ice inside shattering the grain. His breath hung in clouds that wouldn't dissipate. Even inside the barn, even with the animals and the stove, the cold pressed in like a living thing. He was throwing another frozen log onto the pile of useless wood when he heard the sound. Hoofbeats. Not hurried, but steady. Marta rode up on her old mare, both of them breathing steam into the white air. She sat straight in the saddle, her face calm. "Morning, Isaac." He waited. "Came to see if you needed anything." "I'm fine. Your firewood looks troubled." Isaac glanced at the pile of split, frozen logs. "Managing." Marta nodded slowly. "I had some extra cornmeal put by. Thought you might—" "I don't need charity, Marta." "Wasn't offering charity. Was offering neighbor help." "Same thing when it comes from pity." She studied him for a long moment. "You're a proud man, Isaac Whitlow. Pride keeps you warm, does it?" "Warmer than straw." A small smile touched her face. Not mockery, something else. Something that made Isaac's irritation spike higher. "You laugh, but you'll see. First real storm, that straw of yours will be worthless. Worse than worthless." "Maybe so." She turned her mare. "But my animals slept warm last night. Did yours?" She rode off before he could answer. Isaac stood there, the cold gnawing through his coat, and hated that she had a point. The next 3 days brought cold that made the first night seem gentle. The temperature fell so far, the mercury in Isaac's thermometer disappeared into the bulb. His firewood pile shrank faster than it should. The frozen logs burned dirty and gave half the heat. The barn walls sweated ice. The animals huddled together, their breath creating a fog that froze on the rafters. He was checking on Maggie, wrapping an extra blanket around her, when he heard voices outside. Thomas Reedy and his son Jacob were standing by Isaac's barn door, looking across the field toward Marta's place. "See it?" Thomas said. "I see it," Jacob replied. "No ice on the walls." Isaac stepped out. "What are you two doing here?" Thomas turned. "Checking on neighbors. This cold's killing livestock all up and down the valley. Lost 2 calves myself last night." "I'm sorry to hear it. How are your animals?" Isaac hesitated. "Managing." "Yeah?" Thomas looked skeptical. "Because from where I'm standing, your barn looks like every other barn in the county, frozen solid. Except hers." He pointed toward Marta's property. Isaac didn't look. He knew what he'd see. "That straw thing she's doing," Jacob said. "Looks crazy, but nothing," Isaac cut in. "It's straw. It's doing nothing." "Then why ain't her barn freezing like yours?" Thomas asked. "Could be a dozen reasons. Better drainage, tighter construction, different animals." "Or it could be the straw," Jacob said quietly. Isaac felt heat rise in his chest, despite the cold. "It's not the straw. Straw doesn't insulate. It doesn't hold heat. It's cheap and worthless, and anyone who thinks otherwise is fooling themselves." Thomas and Jacob exchanged a look. "Right," Thomas said. "Well, we should keep moving. Got more people to check on." They left. Isaac went back inside the barn and tried to make his animals more comfortable. The cold seemed to seep through the walls like water through cloth. Everything he did felt inadequate. That evening, he stood in his doorway and watched smoke rise from Marta's chimney. Straight and steady, the way smoke rises from a properly burning fire. His own stove was struggling. The frozen firewood created more smoke than heat, and half of it just smoldered. He told himself it didn't mean anything. He told himself for 3 more days. On the 6th night of the deep freeze, Isaac gave up lying to himself. He saddled Maggie, even though she was too cold to want to move, and rode across to Marta's barn. The moon was bright enough to cast shadows. His breath was ice crystals in his beard. He dismounted outside her barn and stood there, just looking. The straw-wrapped walls looked absurd in the moonlight, ridiculous, like something a child would build. He put his hand on the barn wall. It wasn't frozen. He pressed harder. The wood beneath the straw was cold, but not ice cold, not like his barn. There was a difference, subtle, but unmistakable. The barn door opened. Marta stood there with a lantern. "Isaac." "Just checking on you." "At midnight?" He pulled his hand back from the wall. "Making rounds." She held the lantern higher. "Want to come in?" He should have said no. Should have ridden home. Instead, he followed her inside. The difference hit him immediately. The air was still cold. This was Kansas in winter, not a parlor in spring. But it was different cold. Bearable cold. The animals were calm. No ice on the walls. The stove burned clean. "How?" The word came out before he could stop it. Marta set the lantern on a post. "The straw traps air. The air slows the cold. It's not magic, Isaac. It's just different than what you know." "Where'd you learn this?" "My mother. She grew up in Finland. They used straw and moss and anything else that would trap air. She always said the prairie reminded her of home. Flat, cold, trying to kill you if you're not clever." Isaac walked to the nearest wall, ran his hand along the inside. "This shouldn't work." "But it does." He turned to face her. "I called you foolish." "You did." "I was wrong." Marta's expression softened. "Takes a strong man to say that. Takes a stubborn fool to wait this long to see the truth." Isaac looked around the barn again. "I'm losing animals, Marta. My firewood's half useless. The cold's winning. So change the fight." "How?" She smiled. "Same way I did. Stack some straw, swallow some pride, save what matters." Isaac stood there in her warm barn, surrounded by proof of his error, and felt something shift inside him. Not just acceptance, something deeper. A recognition that survival on the prairie required more than experience. It required adaptation, humility, the willingness to learn from anyone who had something worth teaching. "I'll need help," he said. "I'll be there at first light." He nodded and turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Marta?" "Yes?" "Thank you." "You're welcome, neighbor." He rode home, through cold that no longer felt quite so deadly. The moon lit his path. The stars watched without judgment. And for the first time in 6 days, Isaac Whitlaw felt something other than dread about the winter ahead. He felt hope. Dawn came cold and clear. Isaac was already outside when Marta rode up, leading a wagon stacked with straw bales. She'd brought her hired hand, a young man named Peter Colson, who'd worked for her husband. "Thought you might need more than what you have," Marta said, climbing down. Isaac looked at the wagon load. "That's half your supply." "That's what neighbors do." Peter was already unloading, his breath steaming in the frigid air. Isaac grabbed a bale and felt the weight of it, and the weight of what he was about to do. Every farmer within 10 miles would see this. Every man who'd heard him call Marta foolish would know he'd changed his mind. "Isaac Whitlaw backing down from something he said," he muttered. "That'll be the talk for months." Marta pulled on her work gloves. "Better to be talked about than frozen to death. Easy for you to say. You were right from the start." "Was I?" She positioned a bale against his north wall. Or was I just desperate enough to try something different? They worked in silence for a while, the rhythm settling between them. Stack, position, secure. Stack, position, secure. Peter moved faster than both of them, his young muscles making quick work of the heavy bales. They were halfway through the north wall when Thomas Reedy rode up. "Morning," he called out, not dismounting. Isaac straightened. "Thomas, heard you might be doing some improvements." "Word travels fast." "In a valley this small?" Thomas smiled. "Word travels before you even speak it." He studied the partially wrapped wall. "So you're really doing this? The straw thing?" Isaac waited for the mockery, the comment about how he'd changed his tune. "Instead," Thomas said, "think it'll work for a smaller barn? Mine's maybe 2/3 the size of yours." Marta answered before Isaac could. "Works for any size. Just needs to trap the air against the wall." Thomas nodded slowly. "I lost 2 more calves last night. Can't afford to lose any more." He looked at Isaac. "You willing to help once you're done here?" Isaac felt something shift in his chest. Not just one man changing his mind. 2. Maybe more. "Soon as we finish my north and west walls. I'll bring my wagon by this afternoon. Get some straw from the Hendersons." Thomas tipped his hat. "Appreciate it, Isaac." He rode off. Peter kept working, but Marta had stopped, watching Isaac's face. "What?" Isaac asked. "Nothing. Just, you could have said no. Could have let him figure it out himself." "Why would I do that?" "Because 2 days ago, you were convinced this was foolish." Isaac picked up another bale. 2 days ago, I was convinced of a lot of things. By noon, Isaac's barn had straw wrapped around 2 full walls. The difference was already noticeable. The interior temperature had risen several degrees, just from partial coverage. His animals were calmer. The frost on the inside walls had started to retreat. They broke for food. Marta had brought bread and cheese, and they sat on bales in the weak winter sun. "Your mother," Isaac said between bites. "The one from Finland. She still alive?" "Died when I was 12. Fever took her." "I'm sorry." Marta shrugged. "Was a long time ago, but her lessons stuck. She always said the land doesn't care about your pride. It only cares if you're smart enough to survive it." "Sounds like a wise woman." "She was." Marta looked across the prairie. "My husband thought I was crazy when I first told him about the straw. Said it was old country nonsense. But he was willing to try. That's what made him different. He was willing to learn." Isaac heard the grief beneath her words. "How long were you married?" 18 years. We came out here together, just kids, really. Built everything from nothing." Her voice caught. "And then one morning he went out to check the fence line and his heart just stopped. Found him lying in the grass like he was taking a nap." "Marta, don't." She wiped her eyes quickly. "Don't say you're sorry again. I know you are. Everyone's sorry. But sorry doesn't keep the barn standing, or the animals fed, or the land working." "No," Isaac said quietly. "It doesn't." They finished eating in silence, then they went back to work. By mid-afternoon, Thomas returned with his wagon and 3 other farmers, Jacob Reedy, Daniel Morrison, and old Emil Voss. They all stood looking at Isaac's barn like it was some kind of curiosity. "It's just straw," Isaac said. "Straw that works," Emil replied. He was the oldest farmer in the valley, nearly 70, with hands gnarled from decades of work. "I've seen a lot of winters, Isaac. Never seen one this cold this early. If this helps, I'm doing it." "Me too," Daniel said. "Lost a horse last night. Can't afford to lose another." They formed a crew. Isaac and Marta went to Thomas's place first, then Daniel's, then Emil's. By the time darkness fell, 4 barns in the valley had straw wrapping. 4 families had a better chance of surviving the cold. But not everyone was convinced. Isaac was finishing the last of his own barn 2 days later when Marcus Holt rode up. Marcus owned the largest spread in the county, 3 times the land of anyone else, with twice the livestock. He sat on his horse like a man surveying a kingdom. "Isaac." "Marcus?" "Heard you've been busy." Isaac secured the final bale. "Just trying to keep my animals alive." Marcus's eyes swept over the straw-wrapped barn. "By making yourself look like a fool. If being a fool keeps my livestock alive, I'll be a fool. You're wasting material and time on something that doesn't work."
"It does work," Marcus laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound.
"Says who? That widow woman? She's been alone 6 months and already losing her mind, and you're following her into madness." Isaac felt anger spike hot in his chest. Marta Kovrick is one of the smartest people in this valley. Marta Kovrick is a desperate woman doing desperate things, and you're enabling it. Marcus leaned forward in his saddle. "You know what I think? I think you've been alone too long yourself, Isaac. Getting soft. Getting foolish. A real man doesn't need gimmicks to survive winter. A real man does whatever it takes to protect what's his." "Does he?" Marcus straightened. "Well, you wrap your barn in straw and whatever else makes you feel better. But when it fails, and it will fail, don't come crying to me for help." He rode off before Isaac could respond. Peter had been watching from inside the barn. He came out now, his young face troubled.
"He's wrong, isn't he? About the straw?"
"He's wrong about a lot of things," Isaac said. That night, the temperature dropped again. Isaac woke to wind that sounded like wolves howling. He dressed and went to check the barn, bracing himself for the worst. Instead, he found warmth. Not real warmth, the prairie in deep winter didn't allow that, but bearable warmth, survivable warmth. His animals were resting easy. The stove burned clean. The walls showed no ice. It worked. It actually worked. Isaac stood in his barn, surrounded by the proof of Marta's wisdom and his own willingness to change, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not just relief, gratitude. Deep, genuine gratitude for a neighbor who'd been brave enough to try something different, and patient enough to help others learn. The next morning, 3 more farmers showed up asking for help with straw wrapping. Then 2 more. Then 5. Within a week, nearly half the valley had straw-wrapped barns. Marcus Holt's barn remained bare. Isaac was at Marta's place, helping her reinforce some loose sections, when they saw smoke on the horizon. Black smoke, thick and rising fast. "Fire," Marta breathed. They rode hard toward the smoke, Peter following on his horse. Other farmers converged from different directions, all racing toward the same point. Marcus Holt's barn was burning. Not the whole structure, just the southwest corner, where his stovepipe met the wall. But it was spreading fast, the dry wood catching like paper. Marcus and his hands were throwing snow on the flames, but it wasn't enough. Isaac didn't think. He just moved, grabbed a bucket, filled it with snow, ran toward the fire. Thomas appeared beside him, then Daniel, then Emil, then a dozen others, all working together, all fighting the same enemy. It took an hour to kill the fire. When it was finally out, Marcus's barn stood damaged but intact. The southwest corner was charred black.
3 bales of hay were destroyed, but the animals were safe.
Marcus sat on the ground, his face black with soot, his hands shaking. Isaac approached carefully. "You all right?" Marcus looked up. His eyes were red, from smoke or tears, Isaac couldn't tell. "I could have lost everything." But you didn't. Because you helped. Marcus's voice cracked. After what I said to you, after I called you a fool, you still helped. Isaac crouched down to Marcus's level. That's what neighbors do. I don't deserve neighbors like you. Maybe not, but you've got them anyway. Marcus looked at the burned corner of his barn, then at the group of farmers standing nearby. The straw thing. Does it really work? It really does. Even though it looks foolish? Especially because it looks foolish. Isaac offered his hand. Sometimes the best solutions are the ones nobody expects. Marcus took the hand and let Isaac pull him up. I've got pride, Isaac. Too much of it. We all do.
Question is whether we let it kill us. Marcus looked across his property, at the barn that had almost burned, at the animals that had almost died, at the winter that was still trying to claim everything he'd built. I need help, he said quietly. I need to wrap this barn before the next cold snap comes. Marta stepped forward. We'll start tomorrow morning. Marcus turned to her, and Isaac saw the moment when pride finally broke. Mrs. Coverick, I owe you an apology. I called your idea foolish. I was wrong. You weren't the only one, Marta said, glancing at Isaac with a small smile. But you're wise enough to change your mind. That counts for something. They worked on Marcus's barn for 2 days. Nearly every farmer in the valley showed up at some point, bringing straw, bringing labor, bringing the kind of community strength that only appears when survival demands it. On the second evening, with Marcus's barn fully wrapped and the sun setting red over the frozen prairie, Isaac stood beside Marta and watched the valley transform before their eyes. Look at that, Marta said softly. Every barn in sight had straw wrapping now. The entire valley had changed, not just physically, but philosophically. What had seemed cheap and worthless a week ago was now recognized as essential. What had been dismissed as desperate foolishness was now understood as practical wisdom. Your mother would be proud, Isaac said. Marta smiled. I think she'd say we're all just finally learning what she tried to teach me 30 years ago. What's that? That survival isn't about being right. It's about being willing to change. Isaac nodded. The cold was coming again. He could feel it in the air, see it in the way the light fell across the snow. But this time, the valley was ready. This time, they had adapted. This time, they would endure together. Thank you, he said. For what? For being stubborn enough to try something different. For being patient enough to teach the rest of us. For being strong enough to survive alone until we were smart enough to help. Marta's eyes glistened. I wasn't trying to be any of those things, Isaac. I was just trying not to die. Sometimes, that's the bravest thing a person can do. They stood together as darkness fell. Two neighbors who'd started as skeptic and believer, and ended as something closer to friends. The stars came out sharp and cold. The wind picked up. Winter pressed harder against the valley. But the barns stood wrapped and warm, and the people inside them had learned something worth more than any amount of conventional wisdom. That sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places, and the strongest communities are built not by those who know everything, but by those who are willing to learn anything. 3 days after Marcus's barn was wrapped, the cold turned vicious. Isaac woke to silence, so complete it felt wrong. No wind, no creaking wood, just absolute stillness that made his skin crawl. He dressed quickly and stepped outside. The world had frozen solid. Not just cold, frozen. The air itself seemed crystallized. His breath didn't fog. It fell in tiny ice particles that tinkled when they hit the ground. The thermometer outside his door showed a number so low he had to read it twice to believe it. 42 degrees below zero. He hurried to the barn. The straw wrapping held, thank God, but inside he found something that stopped him cold. His firewood pile had transformed overnight. The logs weren't just frozen, they'd become something else entirely. When he picked one up, it felt wrong in his hands. Too heavy, too dense. He grabbed his axe and swung at a log. The axe bounced off like he'd hit granite. What in God's name? He tried again. Same result. The wood had frozen so completely, so thoroughly, that it had become nearly as hard as stone. Unburnable, unsplittable, useless. Isaac stood there holding his axe, staring at his firewood pile, and felt panic rise in his throat. He had maybe 2 days of properly dried wood left inside the barn. After that, he'd have to burn this stone-hard frozen timber. And it wouldn't burn. It couldn't burn. He rode to Marta's place so fast, Maggie nearly stumbled twice. Marta was in her barn, and Isaac saw immediately that she'd discovered the same problem. She stood over her firewood pile with a splitting maul in her hands, her face pale. "It's like hitting rock," she said without greeting. "I can't split any of it." "Same at my place." Isaac dismounted. "How much dry wood you got left?" "Maybe 3 days' worth if I'm careful. You?" 2 days, maybe less. They looked at each other, the same calculation running through both their minds. Once the dry wood ran out, they'd have no way to heat their barns. The animals would freeze. The crops stored in the lofts would be destroyed. Everything they'd worked to save would be lost anyway. "The straw won't matter if we can't keep fires burning," Marta said quietly. Isaac walked to her firewood pile and picked up one of the frozen logs. It felt like holding a piece of iron. "There has to be a way. We just need to..." "To what? Unfreeze them? Thaw them somehow?" Marta's voice carried an edge of desperation. "Isaac, even if we brought them inside, it would take days for them to thaw enough to split. Days we don't have." He set the log down carefully. "Then we find another solution." "What solution? You can't make firewood out of nothing." "No," Isaac said slowly, his mind working. "But maybe we don't need as much as we think." "What do you mean?" He turned to look at her barn walls, still wrapped in straw, still holding the warmth. "Your barn's been warmer than mine was before the straw, right? Even with the same amount of fire?" "Yes, but..." "So the straw's already cutting how much wood we need. Maybe we can cut it even more." Marta frowned. "How? We can't add more straw. There's already as much as the walls can hold." Isaac paced the length of the barn, thinking. The straw trapped air. The trapped air slowed heat loss. If they could trap more air, create more barriers between the inside and the cold. "What if we doubled it?" he said suddenly. "Doubled what?" "The straw. What if we built a second layer? And a third?" Marta stared at him. That's a lot of straw, Isaac." "But would it work?" She thought about it, her practical mind working through the physics. "In theory, yes. Each layer would trap more air, create more insulation. But we'd need every bale of straw left in the valley. Maybe more than we have." "Then we'd better start asking." They rode to Thomas Reedy's place first. He was in his barn, staring at his own stone-hard firewood pile with the kind of despair Isaac recognized all too well. "I'm ruined," Thomas said when he saw them. 3 days of good wood left. After that..." He gestured helplessly at the frozen logs. "We have an idea," Isaac said, "but we need straw. All the straw you can spare." Thomas looked at him like he'd gone mad. "For what?" "More layers. If 1 layer of straw cuts the heat loss, maybe 3 or 4 layers cuts it enough that we can stretch our good wood for weeks instead of days."
And if it doesn't work? Then we're no worse off than we are now.
Thomas studied them both. You're serious.
Dead serious, Marta said. This cold isn't letting up. It's only getting worse. We adapt or we die.
Thomas was quiet for a long moment.
Then he said, I've got maybe 30 bales left. Take them. They gathered straw from every farm in the valley. Some had plenty to spare. Others gave their last bales, trusting that the gamble would pay off. By afternoon, Isaac's barn had wagons full of straw surrounding it, hundreds of bales waiting to be stacked. Marcus Holt arrived with a full wagon. Heard what you're trying, he said to Isaac. Thought you might need more. I thought you gave all your extra straw to your own barn. I did. This is from my winter feed supply. Isaac felt his throat tighten. Marcus, you need that to feed your cattle. I need my cattle alive to feed them at all. Marcus climbed down from the wagon. Where do you want it? They worked through the afternoon, building layer upon layer around Isaac's barn. 1 layer of straw, then 2, then 3. The barn began to disappear beneath the golden wrapping, until it looked less like a structure and more like a massive haystack. Emil Voss arrived as they were starting the 4th layer. You're building a fortress, he said. Building a chance, Isaac replied.
Think it'll work?
Ask me in 3 days. They finished as darkness fell. Isaac's barn stood transformed, wrapped in so much straw it seemed to glow in the moonlight. He went inside and felt the difference immediately. The air was noticeably warmer. Not warm, but warmer. The kind of warmth that meant survival. He used half his normal amount of wood in the stove that night. The barn stayed comfortable. The animals rested easy. It was working. The next morning, farmers from across the valley showed up to build their own multi-layered fortresses. Marta's barn got 4 layers. Thomas's got 5. Daniel Morrison's got 6. He had the most animals and the least dry wood remaining. But Marcus Holt's barn got 7. Isaac found him there on the 3rd day, supervising the final layer. You trying to build higher than everyone else? Marcus smiled. A real smile, not the superior smirk Isaac had known before. Trying to make up for lost time. I wasted 2 weeks refusing to listen. Now I'm 2 weeks behind on staying alive. You're doing fine, Marcus. Am I? Marcus looked at the massive straw structure. A month ago, I would have laughed at anyone who did this. Would have called them desperate, foolish, weak. And now? Now I'm grateful they were brave enough to be foolish. He paused. Isaac, I need to ask you something. Go ahead. If this cold keeps up, and it will keep up, we both know it, some of us won't make it. Some of us will run out of good wood before spring. Some of us will lose animals no matter how much straw we pile up. Isaac nodded slowly. I know. So what do we do? Just let them freeze? Let them fail? No, Isaac said firmly. We share. Share what? We're all running on empty. Then we share the empty. Pool our good wood. Ration it together. Some nights we all burn less so everyone can burn something. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. You're talking about voluntary rationing, about trusting every farmer in this valley to take only what they need. I am. That's never worked, not once in the history of this county. Then maybe it's time it did. That evening, Isaac called a meeting at his barn. Every farmer in the valley came, some riding horses, some walking through the brutal cold, all of them desperate for solutions. Isaac stood before them, his breath fogging in the freezing air. We're all facing the same problem. Stone-hard firewood we can't burn. Limited supplies of good wood. Cold that's trying to kill us. Alone, some of us will make it, and some of us won't. Together, we might all survive. "What are you proposing?" Daniel Morrison asked. "A wood pool. We inventory every stick of burnable wood in the valley, divide it equally, ration it together." The crowd erupted. "That's communism! I worked for my wood. Why should I give up what's mine?" Isaac waited for the shouting to die down.
Then he said quietly, "Because if your neighbor freezes to death, you have to live with that. And because next winter, next crisis, next impossible situation, you might be the one who needs help." Silence fell. Marta stepped forward. "I'll put my wood in the pool." Thomas raised his hand. "So will I." Emil Voss nodded. "Count me in." One by one, the farmers agreed. Not all of them. 3 held out, choosing to keep their own supplies private. But most of the valley committed to the pool. They spent the next day counting and distributing wood. It was brutal work, in brutal cold. But the mathematics were clear. Pooled together, they had enough good firewood to keep everyone's stove burning at minimum levels for 6 weeks. Maybe 7, if they were careful. 6 weeks to get through the worst of the winter. 6 weeks to stay alive. Isaac was hauling his share back to his barn when Marta rode up beside him. "This is going to work," she said. "You sound surprised." "I am surprised. A month ago, these people were all independent operators. Now they're sharing resources like a commune." "Desperate times." "No," Marta said thoughtfully. "It's more than desperation. It's evolution. The valley's learning to survive differently." Isaac looked at her. "Your mother teach you that too?" "No. That one I'm learning right alongside everyone else." They worked in companionable silence for a while. Then Isaac said, "Marta, can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask." "Are you lonely?" She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was soft. "Every single day. But I'm also alive. And sometimes that has to be enough." "It doesn't seem like enough." "No," she agreed. "It doesn't. But it's what I have." Isaac wanted to say more, wanted to tell her that she didn't have to be alone, that the valley had become a kind of family, that he understood loneliness better than most. But the words caught in his throat, and the moment passed. That night, the temperature dropped even further. Isaac woke to sounds he'd never heard before. Trees exploding in the forest, as the sap inside them froze and expanded. It sounded like gunshots in the darkness. He checked his barn. The 7 layers of straw held firm. The rationed wood burned steady. The animals were safe. Across the valley, in barn after barn wrapped in golden fortresses of straw, the same scene played out. Farmers huddled close to their stoves, burning their carefully measured portions of good wood, trusting that the layers of insulation would make it enough. The firewood that had turned to stone sat useless in every woodshed, cheap and worthless, just as the straw had once been labeled. But the straw had proven its value, and somehow, in the proving, it had transformed more than just temperature. It had transformed a community. Isaac stood in his barn doorway and watched the stars wheel overhead. The cold was absolute. The darkness was complete. But scattered across the valley, small lights glowed. Fires burning in well-insulated barns. Warmth purchased by cooperation and humility and the willingness to change. He thought about pride and stubbornness, about wisdom that comes from unexpected sources, about how the things we label cheap and worthless sometimes turn out to be the very things that save us. And he thought about Marta Koverick, alone in her barn, keeping watch over animals and memories, and a future that felt uncertain, but at least felt possible. Spring was months away.
The stone-hard firewood would likely stay frozen until then. The cold would probably get worse before it got better. But the valley would endure. They'd learned how. The wood pool lasted 4 weeks, not 6, not 7. 4 weeks before Peter Carlson rode through the valley in the middle of the night, pounding on doors, his voice raw with panic. "The Morrison barn! It's the Morrison barn!" Isaac was dressed and riding before his mind fully registered what Peter had said. Other farmers converged on Daniel Morrison's property from all directions, their lanterns creating small islands of light in the frozen darkness. Daniel's barn wasn't on fire. It was worse than fire. The north wall had collapsed inward, not from structural failure, from the weight of ice that had accumulated despite the straw wrapping. Days of moisture from the animal's breath had condensed on the inner wall, frozen, accumulated, grown heavier and heavier, until the old timber finally gave way. Daniel stood in the wreckage, his face blank with shock. His cattle were penned in the remaining corner, huddled together and terrified. The stove had tipped over when the wall fell. The fire was out. The cold was flooding in, like water through a broken dam. "How long ago?" Isaac asked. "An hour, maybe less." Daniel's voice was hollow. "I heard the cracking, but I thought it was the trees again." "By the time I realized—" "We need to move the animals," Marcus interrupted. "Right now, before they freeze." They worked fast, herding Daniel's cattle out of the ruined barn and distributing them among the other farms. Thomas took 3. Emil took 2. Marcus took 4. Isaac took the remaining 2 calves. By the time the animals were settled, dawn was breaking cold and gray. Daniel stood in front of his collapsed barn, alone. Isaac walked over slowly. "Daniel, I'm finished." Daniel's voice was flat. "That barn was 70 years old. My grandfather built it. My father maintained it. I was supposed to pass it to my sons." He gestured at the wreckage. "Now it's kindling. We can rebuild. With what? With stone-hard lumber I can't cut? With nails I can't afford? In cold that would kill me before I drove the first spike." Daniel turned to Isaac, his eyes empty. "I'm finished, Isaac. I just don't know it yet." Isaac wanted to argue, wanted to find the words that would pull Daniel back from the edge. But what words existed for this? What comfort could he offer that wouldn't sound like a lie? Marta appeared beside them. She'd been helping settle Daniel's cattle at Thomas's place. "Daniel Morrison," she said firmly, "look at me." Daniel turned slowly. "You think you're finished. I understand that. 6 months ago, I stood over my husband's grave and thought the exact same thing. But you know what I learned?" "What?" "That finished and dead aren't the same thing. You're not dead. You're standing here, breathing. That means you're not finished. My barn is broken, yes. But barns can be fixed. Springs comes eventually. Trees thaw. We'll help you rebuild. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering." She looked around at the gathered farmers. "We all are, aren't we?" Thomas nodded. "Soon as the weather breaks, we start rebuilding." "I'll donate the first load of lumber," Marcus said. Emil raised his hand. "I've got roofing material stored." One by one, the farmers committed resources, labor, time. Daniel stood in the center of it all, tears freezing on his face. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. "Maybe not," Isaac said gently. "But you've got it anyway. That's what community means." They spent the rest of the day securing what was left of Daniel's barn, salvaging what they could, protecting the stored grain from the elements. It was exhausting work and killing cold, But no one complained. No one left until the job was done. Isaac was heading home at dusk when Marta caught up with him. "Wait!" He stopped. She looked exhausted, her face raw from the cold and the long day. "Thank you for what you did back there," she said. "For Daniel." "I didn't do anything you didn't do first." "You stood with him when he was breaking. That's not nothing." They walked together in silence for a moment. Then Isaac said, "Marta, I've been thinking." "Dangerous habit," he smiled despite himself. "I've been thinking about what you said, about being lonely." Her expression shifted, becoming guarded. "Isaac, just hear me out. You've been alone in that house for 6 months. I've been alone in mine for longer than I care to count. Neither of us has to be." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe we could be less alone together." Marta stopped walking. "Isaac Whitlow, are you proposing to me?" "What? No, I'm just—" He fumbled for words. "I'm saying maybe we could have dinner together sometimes. Talk. Be neighbors in a more intentional way." She studied his face for a long moment. "You're lonely too." "Yes." "And you think 2 lonely people make one less lonely situation?" "I think 2 people who understand survival might understand each other pretty well." Marta smiled, small and sad and somehow hopeful. "All right." "All right?" "Dinner. Tomorrow night. My place. Bring whatever you can spare from your rations." Isaac felt something warm bloom in his chest, despite the cold. "I'll be there." But the next evening, he wasn't. The wood pool ran out. Peter discovered it at mid-morning, checking the central storage barn where they'd kept the pooled supply. He came racing to Isaac's place, his young face pale with terror. "It's gone! All of it! Someone took the last of the good wood!" "That's impossible. We had another week's worth." "Come see for yourself." Isaac rode to the storage barn with dread coiling in his gut. Peter was right. The good wood was gone, every last piece. And in its place, someone had left a stack of the frozen stone-hard logs. A theft. A betrayal. Someone in the valley had stolen from the pool. Within an hour, every farmer knew. They gathered at the storage barn, angry and scared and demanding answers. "Who would do this?" Thomas shouted. "Who would steal from their own neighbors?" "Someone desperate enough," Emil said quietly. "Someone who decided their survival mattered more than the pool." "It was probably one of the 3 who didn't join," Daniel suggested. "Harker, or Paulson, or—" "Don't start accusing people without proof," Marta interrupted. "That's how communities destroy themselves." "But we need to know," Thomas insisted. "We need to find who did this and—" "And what?" Marcus asked. "Take the wood back? They've already burned it by now. It's gone." Silence fell. The reality settled over them like ice. "So what do we do?" Peter asked. "We've all got maybe 2 or 3 days of personal supply left. After that—" No one wanted to finish that sentence. Isaac looked at the faces around him. Frightened, angry, desperate. A month ago, these people had been independent operators. Then they'd learned to cooperate. Now that cooperation was being tested in the worst possible way. "We go back to straw," he said. Everyone turned to stare at him. "What?" Thomas asked. "The straw worked for insulation. What if we burn it?" "Straw doesn't burn hot enough to heat a barn," Emil said. "It burns fast and gives almost no heat. Not by itself, but what if we mixed it with the frozen wood? Used the straw to get the stone-hard logs hot enough to ignite?" Marcus frowned. "That's actually not a terrible idea. If we could get the frozen wood burning, it would last longer than straw alone." "It's worth trying," Marta said. "What choice do we have?" They spent the rest of the day experimenting. Isaac tried different ratios, 1 part straw to 1 part frozen wood, 2 to 1, 3 to 1. Most combinations failed. The straw would burn hot and fast, but the frozen logs would just sit there, slowly warming but never catching. Then he tried something different. He built a small pile of straw, placed 1 frozen log on top, added more straw around and over the log, completely encasing it. Then he lit it and stepped back. The straw caught immediately, burning hot and bright. The heat had nowhere to go except into the frozen log. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. Isaac was ready to give up. Then the log began to smoke. Not much, just a thin wisp curling from where the straw's heat had finally penetrated the frozen exterior. 5 minutes later, the log ignited. Isaac stood there, watching a piece of stone-hard firewood burn, and felt hope surge through him like electricity. "It works," he breathed. "It actually works." They spread the technique through the valley that evening. Every farmer built the same kind of straw-wrapped fire. It wasn't efficient. It took enormous amounts of straw to ignite even a single log. But it worked. And working meant surviving. Isaac was testing a second log when Marta appeared in his barn doorway. "Dinner's long past," she said. He'd completely forgotten. "Marta, I'm so sorry. The wood situation, and then the experiments, and—" "I know. I was doing the same thing at my place." She came inside, brushing snow from her coat. "Peter told me you got it working." "Barely. Uses up straw like you wouldn't believe." "How much straw do we have left in the valley?" Isaac did the mental math and felt his stomach drop. "Maybe 3 weeks' worth, if we're using it just for insulation. Less than a week if we're burning it to ignite the frozen logs." "So we're trading one problem for another." "Seems that way." Marta sat down on the hay bale, suddenly looking exhausted. "Isaac, I'm scared." He'd never heard her admit fear before. It shook him. "We'll figure something out." "Will we? Or are we just delaying the inevitable?" She looked at him directly. "What happens when the straw runs out? What happens when we've burned every bale and the cold's still here and the wood's still frozen?" Isaac had no answer. They sat in silence, the weight of impossible choices pressing down on them both. Finally, Marta said quietly, "My husband used to say that prairie winters were God's way of testing who really deserved to stay. I never understood what he meant until now. And I think maybe God's test isn't about strength or preparation. It's about adaptation, about being humble enough to learn, brave enough to try new things, connected enough to help each other." "You think we're passing?" "I think we're still alive. That has to count for something." Isaac looked at this woman who'd started a revolution with straw bales and stubbornness, who'd been called foolish and worthless and cheap, who'd proven stronger than anyone expected. "Marta Coverick, you're the most remarkable person I've ever met." She smiled. "Remarkable or desperate?" "Both. Maybe there's not much difference." They sat together in the barn, watching the experimental fire burn, neither of them ready to face the cold outside or the uncertainty ahead. Just 2 people trying to survive an impossible winter, finding whatever warmth they could in the small moments of shared struggle. Outside, the temperature continued to fall. The stars glittered like ice shards, and across the valley, farmers wrapped their precious straw around frozen logs, buying themselves another day, another night, another slim chance at survival. The firewood labeled cheap and worthless had become stone, but the straw labeled cheap and worthless had become salvation. And somewhere in that reversal, in that transformation of value and meaning, the valley had learned something that would outlast any winter. That wisdom often comes from the most unexpected sources, and strength is found not in individual certainty, but in collective humility. Isaac added another handful of straw to the fire and watched it catch. One more log burning, one more night survived, one more chance to see what tomorrow would bring. The straw ran out on a Tuesday. Isaac was in his barn, trying to coax another frozen log to ignite when Peter burst through the door. "It's gone. Every last bale. The entire valley's burned through it all." Isaac felt the words like a physical blow. "That's impossible. We had 3 days left." "We thought we had 3 days, but everyone's been burning more than they should, trying to stay warm, trying to keep animals alive." Peter's voice cracked. "What do we do now?" Isaac looked at the half-ignited log in his stove. Without straw to jumpstart the frozen wood, it was just dead weight. Useless. He had maybe 6 hours of heat left. Then nothing. "Get everyone to the storage barn," Isaac said. "Right now." Within an hour, every farmer in the valley stood in the empty storage barn, staring at bare walls and empty corners. The good wood was gone. The straw was gone. All that remained were the stone-hard frozen logs that wouldn't burn. "We're finished," someone said. Isaac couldn't tell who. "We're not finished," Marta said sharply. "We're just out of easy answers." "What's the hard answer, then?" Thomas asked. "Because from where I'm standing, we've got nothing left to burn and a winter that won't quit." Marta looked at Isaac. He saw the question in her eyes. "Do you have anything? Any idea at all?" He didn't. Marcus stepped forward. "There might be one thing. It's desperate, maybe foolish, but it's all I've got." "What?" Daniel asked. "The barns themselves. We burn the barns." Shocked silence. "You've lost your mind," Emil said. "Have I? Think about it. We've got structures made of 70-year-old dry timber. Burns hot, burns long. We tear down one barn, distribute the wood, it keeps the rest of us alive for weeks." "And the farmer whose barn you tear down?" Marta asked quietly. "What happens to them?" "They move in with neighbors, share space, consolidate." "You're talking about destroying someone's life work to save everyone else." "I'm talking about survival." Marcus looked around the group. "Anyone got a better idea?" No one spoke. "Then we draw lots," Marcus said. "Fair and simple. Whoever draws short loses their barn." "No," Isaac heard his own voice, firm and clear. "We're not drawing lots. We're not sacrificing anyone." "Then what, Isaac? What's your solution?" Isaac looked at the frozen logs stacked against the wall. Stone hard, unburnable, worthless. Except they weren't worthless. They were just changed. "What if we're thinking about this wrong?" he said slowly. "What if the wood turning to stone isn't the problem? What if it's the solution?" "You're not making sense," Thomas said. "The wood froze solid because of the moisture inside it, right? All that water turned to ice, made it too hard to burn." "Yes, and?" "And ice melts. What if instead of trying to burn the wood while it's frozen, we thaw it first?" Marta caught on immediately. "But you said it would take days to thaw enough to split. Days we don't have." "Days if we just wait for it to thaw naturally. But what if we forced it?" "How?" Marcus asked. Isaac thought fast, his mind racing through possibilities. "Body heat. Animal heat. We bring the frozen logs into the barns with the animals. The accumulated warmth, even without fires, might be enough to start the thawing process." "That's insane," someone said. "So was wrapping barns in straw," Isaac shot back. "So was pooling our firewood. So was burning straw to ignite frozen logs. Every solution we found has seemed insane at first. Emil stepped forward. Say it works. Say the logs start to thaw. Then what? Then we split them before they freeze again. Work in shifts. Keep the logs moving from barn to stove before the cold takes them back. You're talking about constant labor, Daniel said. Day and night. No rest. I'm talking about staying alive. Silence fell. Isaac could see the exhaustion in every face, the desperation, the fear. But beneath it, something else, something that had grown over the past month of survival. Trust. I'll try it, Marta said. Thomas nodded. Me too. One by one, they committed. Even Marcus, who'd initially proposed sacrificing a barn, agreed to try Isaac's plan first. They scattered to their properties and began hauling frozen logs into their barns. Isaac brought in 50 pieces, stacking them near where his 2 borrowed calves generated the most body heat. The logs felt like iron in his hands. He checked them every hour. For the first day, nothing changed. The logs remained stone-hard and frozen solid. On the second day, he noticed moisture on the surface of one log. Just a thin sheen, barely visible, but it was there. It's working, he whispered. He grabbed his axe and swung. The blade bit into the log, not deep, but it bit. The wood was still mostly frozen, but the surface had softened enough to mark. He swung again, and again. Slowly, painfully, he began to split the partially thawed log. It took him an hour to reduce one log to burnable pieces. But when he fed those pieces into his stove, they caught. They burned. They gave heat. Isaac stood watching the fire and felt tears freeze on his face. Across the valley, other farmers made the same discovery. The process was brutal. Hauling logs inside, waiting for them to begin thawing, splitting them in a race against refreezing, burning them immediately. It required constant work, constant vigilance. But it worked. They organized into shifts. Groups of farmers would work together, rotating between hauling, splitting, and burning. No one slept more than a few hours at a time. Everyone was exhausted, but everyone was alive. On the 5th day of the new system, Isaac was at Marta's barn helping her split a partially thawed log when she stopped mid-swing. Isaac, look! He turned. She was pointing at the horizon. The sky had changed. Still gray, still cold, but different somehow. Softer. The light falling across the snow carried a quality he hadn't seen in weeks. Is that? I think so. They stood together, watching the sky shift, and neither of them wanted to say it out loud. Didn't want to jinx it. But they both knew. The cold was breaking. That night, the temperature rose to 0 for the first time in 40 days. Not warm, still well below freezing, but compared to the depths they'd endured, it felt tropical. The next morning, Isaac woke to a sound he'd forgotten existed. Dripping. Ice melting from his roof. Water running where everything had been frozen solid. He dressed and ran outside. All across the valley, the same scene. Farmers standing in their doorways, faces turned toward the sky, watching the ice retreat. The deep freeze was over. Within 3 days, the stone-hard firewood began to thaw naturally. Within a week, it could be split normally again. The crisis that had seemed insurmountable simply ended. But something else had begun. Isaac was splitting wood behind his barn when Marta rode up. She looked different, lighter somehow.
the weight of survival no longer pressing quite so hard. "Morning," she said. "Morning. Coffee's on if you want some." "I'll take some in a minute. First, I need to tell you something." Isaac set down his axe. "What?" "I figured out who stole from the wood pool." His stomach tightened. "Who?" "Me." Isaac stared at her. "What?" "Not all of it, just 2 days' worth. I took it 3 weeks ago when I thought my personal supply was running out faster than everyone else's. I was scared. I panicked. I broke the trust." "Marta, I know what you're going to say, that it's okay, that I was desperate, that everyone understands." She looked at him directly. "But I need to own it. I stole from the community. I broke the pool. I was the betrayal everyone was looking for." Isaac processed this slowly. "Did anyone else know?" "Just you now. I'm going to tell everyone else today." "They'll understand." "Maybe. Maybe not. But they deserve the truth." She paused. "I've been thinking a lot about what makes something worthless. The straw was worthless until we needed it. The frozen wood was worthless until we learned to thaw it. And me, a widow, alone, supposedly too weak to survive. I was worthless until I proved I wasn't." "You were never worthless." "To some people I was. To myself, sometimes." She smiled sadly. "But here's what I learned. Nothing is worthless. Everything has value if you're creative enough to find it. Even mistakes, even theft, even desperation." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm going to confess. I'm going to own what I did. And I'm going to trust that this community we've built is strong enough to forgive." That afternoon, she called everyone together and told them the truth. The reaction was complicated. Some were angry, some were disappointed, but most understood, because most of them, in their hearts, knew they would have done the same thing in her position. Marcus surprised everyone by speaking first. "Mrs. Kovrick, you taught this valley how to survive. You gave us the straw solution that saved our lives. If you took some wood when you were scared, well, seems like a small debt compared to what we owe you." Thomas nodded. "You've helped every single one of us, more than once. I figure that balances the books." One by one, they forgave her. Not because she deserved it, but because forgiveness was another form of adaptation, another way of choosing survival over destruction. Marta stood in the center of it all, tears streaming down her face, and Isaac understood something fundamental about community. It wasn't built on perfection. It was built on honesty, forgiveness, and the recognition that everyone is flawed and everyone is trying. Spring came slowly. The snow began to recede. The ice released its grip on the land. Green things started to push through the frozen earth. And on a bright morning in early March, Isaac and Marta stood together, looking at the site where Daniel Morrison's barn had collapsed. A new barn was rising. Every farmer in the valley had contributed: lumber, nails, labor, expertise. Marcus had donated the foundation timbers. Thomas provided the roofing. Emil designed the structure to better handle ice accumulation. Even the 3 farmers who'd never joined the wood pool showed up with tools and willing hands. Daniel stood watching, his eyes bright. "I never thought I'd see this. Never thought I'd have a barn again." "Better barn," Isaac said. "Stronger, built by experience." "Built by community," Marta added. They worked through the day, raising walls and setting beams. By evening, the basic structure stood complete. A barn that would house Daniel's cattle and stand as a monument to what collective effort could achieve. That night, Isaac walked Marta back to her property. The air was mild. The stars were gentle overhead. "Thank you," she said.
For everything. I should be thanking you. You started all of this. Did I? Seems like we all started it together. They reached her door. Isaac hesitated, then said, Marta, that dinner we never had. Would you still be interested? She smiled. Every night this week, if you're offering. I'm offering. Then I accept. She went inside. Isaac rode home through the spring night, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Not just hope. Joy. Actual, genuine joy at being alive and being part of something larger than himself. The winter had tested them. The cold had tried to kill them. The frozen firewood had seemed like a curse, cheap and worthless, transformed into useless stone. But in the end, even that stone had been valuable. Even that curse had been a teacher. Because the valley had learned that value isn't inherent. It's discovered, created, revealed through necessity and creativity, and the willingness to see things differently. The straw that seemed worthless became salvation. The wood that turned to stone became a lesson in adaptation. The widow who seemed weak became a leader. The skeptic who resisted change became a champion of community. The community that started as isolated individuals became a family. Isaac stood in his doorway and looked across the valley. Spring was coming. The land would green, the animals would thrive, the crops would grow. And next winter, when the cold returned, they would be ready. Not because they had the perfect solution, but because they had learned the most important lesson of all. That survival isn't about knowing everything. It's about being willing to learn anything from anyone at any time. The firewood that turned to stone had taught them that. And the teaching would last longer than any winter, outlive any cold, endure beyond any single season. Because some lessons, once learned, transform everything that comes after. And the people who learn them together become something stronger than they ever could have been alone.